Hey everybody, Eric aka Corky here. So one of the questions I get a lot is, what's better, EVA foam or thermoplastic Worbla? I'm going to attempt to just run both these down, my pros and cons of the two materials, and maybe by the end of it it'll give you an idea of what you want to use the next time you do an armor build if you've never used one or the other. These aren't going to be any particular order, just kind of the random way I've thought about what's good and bad about each material. Hopefully you enjoy this and it'll help you with your next build. Thanks for watching. Okay, so Worbla. Probably the best thing about it is it's really easy to cut. Here's just a regular pair of sharp scissors. And you can cut Worbla super easy. After you cut out all your stuff with Worbla, you end up with all these scraps. With a lot of materials, that's just junk that you have to throw away. The great thing about these scraps is they can easily be turned into something else, like this thranduil crown that I built. All of the brown wooden part of this is made out of Worbla scraps. So I heated all those up and smashed it all together. So Worbla scraps are great. I've seen people even make dragons and all kinds of crazy things out of Worbla scraps. So you never, even though Worbla is expensive, you never really have waste because you can turn it into something else, which is definitely an advantage. Once it's cooled off from being heated, it's really durable. This is the underside of one of the Loki van braces. And, you know, just to give you an example of how strong it could be, I'm twisting this with a pretty good amount of force. And once you have it all together, it's pretty tough. It doesn't require any kind of sealer to toughen it up. It's as tough as it is. Probably the biggest advantage of Worbla, and especially for beginners, is complex curves. This is the very first piece I ever made with Worbla. For some reason I decided to start with this piece, but I think it's a good example of even if you haven't worked with a particular material before, Worbla makes it pretty easy to do complex curves. This was one piece that I cut out. You can see on the back kind of the whole one piece. Sandwiched it together with craft foam. I was able to make this ball shape. I literally wrapped this around a mini plush soccer ball that we had. I got that nice great curve without a lot of work. It wasn't that difficult to do. I think that's one of the biggest advantages of Worbla, especially for people that are beginning in this hobby, is complex curves. It definitely lends itself to those types of shapes. So cons of Worbla, probably the number one thing that comes up on most boards and stuff is the cost of Worbla. It definitely is not inexpensive. Jumbo sheet is like $89. That's kind of a steep dive in for a material if you've never worked with it before. You may not know how much you need, so it's like, do you buy one sheet and hope you have enough and then get another one later? Or do you buy a couple and then have too much? One of the hardest things about doing a project is kind of figuring out your materials and resources and what you need. I can give you an example of what I used on Loki, which I ended up using 2 jumbo sheets on Loki. But I also use the method of backing with Worbla too. I know a lot of people have kind of gotten away from that. I prefer the sandwich method with backing the Worbla, mostly just because it makes a nice really rigid piece. I did some of my own testing without the backing on there and I just thought it was too flimsy. That kind of brings me to my next con of Worbla. Worbla by itself, once you heat it, it gets very loose and limp. You have to use like craft foam or something to back it. That could be considered a disadvantage because you're working with craft foam anyway. What's the point of continuing to go with covering it with Worbla if there's other products out there that you could cover it with that would cause you less work in the finishing stage? So I'm going to call that a con. One of the things I learned about Worbla when I started working with it for the first time was you can't sand it. That was something that I wasn't aware of when I first bought it. You have to build layers on it to get it to smooth, and you can't just sand the material because it's a thermoplastic and it really isn't sandable unless you treat it with something first. Which brings me to my number one con or my number one negative to Worbla, and that's finishing. I don't think Worbla is the greatest material if you're looking for an extremely smooth finish. Now that doesn't mean that Worbla can't look good, and there are many ways that you can finish it. I know a lot of people like the wood glue method, which I found to be very tedious. Quite honestly, I just didn't enjoy painting wood glue. There are ways that it can look really good if you want a super smooth finish. Now if you're not going for a super smooth finish, you're maybe like a half smooth, you're painting with dark colors, it seems to lend itself well to more natural looking stuff, more fantasy type things, then Worbla might be your material of choice. But if you want a super smooth finish like my Loki stuff, this was a lot of work, and it's a lot more work than working with EVA foam, quite honestly. If you're looking for an extremely smooth finish, Worbla may not always be your best choice. And just for example, here's what the orange peelish texture of Worbla looks like on this test piece, and this is just a piece that was painted with just primer. You can kind of see the difference, hopefully. I have a whole nother video all about how to finish Worbla super smooth. Now, you don't have to go through all that work if you don't want super smooth. But for me, number one, if I'm going to contemplate using Worbla, and that number one con is going to be, does this need to be a super smooth finish? I'm probably going to go with a different material. EVA foam, also known as craft foam, also known as floor mat foam. This is actually a piece of floor mat foam. It's 1/2 inch thick. Everybody's going to tell you the number one thing about working with this is it's pretty cheap. And you can buy the better stuff at Lowe's is 20 bucks a pack. The not as good stuff at a place like Harbor Freight you can get for 9 bucks a pack. This stuff is definitely inexpensive. Although I wouldn't say it's as easy to do complex curves as it is with Worbla, it's fairly simple if you have a heat gun, especially if you can use it in an oven. I caution using it in your oven that you cook food with, but I myself bought a toaster oven, and whenever I work with foam armor, all of my Calhoun armor, I shaped all that by first heating it in my toaster oven. If you have something like that where you can heat it well and evenly, you can get really pretty good complex curves out of this stuff easier than you would think you can. So we're still talking about EVA foam and sandable. You can get a good sanded shape out of EVA foam, especially if you have something like a benchtop sander. I have a benchtop oscillating belt sander. Almost every piece of this has been shaped. So EVA and finish, it's not like Worbla where it has that orange peel texture. EVA already has a pretty smooth finish, and it can be taken even smoother if you need to. There's several different ways to finish it. I've personally used Epsilon and Plastidip on EVA, and they both have their pros and cons just like everything else. But for the most part, if you want a good looking, fairly smooth finish, you're not going to have to work it nearly as hard as you do with Worbla. Since I just referenced, some of the finish you can do, I just thought I'd quickly show you a shoulder bell from my Gender Bent Sergeant Calhoun costume. And this is EVA foam, and all this one is a few coats of Plastidip, regular paint, spray paint. So not a ton of extra work on this as far as smoothing and things. I don't even remember if I sanded these all that much. The Fierce DD Link armor here is coated in Epsilon, which is a hard resin. And you can work this with wood filler, fill and prime and fill and prime and sand, and get a really super smooth finish out of it. So just a couple pieces of what's possible. Cons of EVA foam. My biggest complaint against EVA foam is it's messy. You have to spend a lot of time sanding this stuff, which is great because it sands well, but it creates a lot of fine particle dust. You need to wear a respirator. Please, 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 if you work with this stuff, wear a respirator. You don't want all those particles in your lungs. It just gets everywhere. I mean, my shop where I do like all my sanding and stuff, it's just covered with the fine black dust that this stuff creates. This is my huge box of EVA scraps. So Just be warned, if you're working with EVA, you're going to end up with a lot of scraps, and I'm still not quite sure what I'm going to do with all this stuff. This is the scraps after doing a full set of armor and a couple rifle builds. More than just a small project, but these things definitely accumulate. This is a big box. Best thing to cut EVA foam is one of these retractable knives. You can buy these at Harbor Freight or Fred Meyer's or wherever. It does cut easily. It takes a little bit of skill to get a square cut. If you don't have your blade nice and square when you're cutting, which is straight up and down, you end up with angles and you can end up with off cuts. There is a little bit of skill involved, so I'm calling that a little bit of a con. You can get over it pretty quick, and the great thing about it is once you learn the angles, you can actually cut angles that you need without even having to sand them. The other con along with cutting EVA is this knife here, even though it's a razor knife, believe it or not, and this is like super easy to cut like butter, this knife will be dull within like 4 cuts. Spend the 20 bucks or 30 bucks and buy a good sharpener that's very easy to sharpen. You just do this between, you know, 3 or 4 cuts and you'll have a nice clean cut every time. But it definitely is a little more of a buy-in than just being able to cut like Worbla with a pair of scissors. So final con for EVA, it doesn't stick to itself like Worbla, and this is specifically compared to Worbla. Great thing about Worbla is you can cut the pieces, you can heat them up, you can stick them together, and they just stay stuck. You don't have to mess with gluing for the most part. With EVA, you have to glue. Most every builder I know uses some type of contact cement. A lot of people use barge, which is what I use. I learned about this from Bill Doran and a few other builders like Evil Ted. And some people hate this stuff because it's flammable and it stinks. So that is also a con, but it's very quick. Once you lay a very small amount on one piece and one on the other, you wait about 5 minutes and stick it together. So EVA foam and Worbla, is there a clear winner for making armor? I personally don't think so. Sure, there's a lot of people that love one over the other, and probably it's because that's what they're used to working with. I think they both clearly have advantages that I outlined and disadvantages that I outlined. And when it comes down to what's best, just keep in mind an old photography saying that goes, the best camera is the one you have with you. And I think when it comes to building stuff, the best material is the one you decide to use. It doesn't matter if it's one of these or even something like paper mache. I've seen some amazing things made out of paper mache. The biggest thing is go out there, create, build and create, and make the things that you love. Whichever you decide to use, I'm sure it'll turn out if you put your hard work into it. I appreciate you sticking through this video if you made it all the way through this. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below here on YouTube, or you can leave them on any of my social media accounts also. Until next time, have fun building.